All right, so what we have for today, as you can see, our topic this month is Get Published, Accelerate the Peer Review Process. All right, to introduce myself briefly, I'm Dr. Clark Holdsworth, Senior Manager Communications and Partnerships at LetPub. My background is academic. I received my doctorate in physiology. This is kind of crucial because you'll see my perspective somewhat during discussion of these publishing topics. It may be a little bit specific to life sciences, but we've seen it all, myself and Dr. Avril Licciardi, who you may have seen in this series as well. And so we speak to many different fields and try to keep it applicable to all. During my time there, I focused predominantly on O2 pressure gradients, all the way from ambient air down to very, very low muscle PO2s in the myoglobin. Mostly interested in states of dysfunction, such as heart failure, diabetes, these types of issues. And this was at Kansas State University. At this time now, I simply manage most of our partnerships and collaborations with journals and publishers. So a lot of this information you're going to be hearing today is things that we gather from our partners, from our collaborators in the publishing industry, from EICs, editors-in-chief, that is, production editors, senior leadership at some of these journals, publishers, and society. So we try to collect that information, and then that's why we have this series, so that we can pass it along to you and improve your publishing experience. All right, so quick overview for today's topics. There's going to be three major steps. First, we'll start off with the basics in the overview. It's going to give you a picture of the areas and problems that we're going to be trying to address. And then the three big steps that you're going to see come out from this presentation where you can expedite the publishing process is going to be in finding the right journal, the whole step before submission, and then that key step after peer review, which you could also consider as prior to responding to the reviewers. And obviously that's a big step. It's one that we've done entire topics on. Actually, all of these, each of these three steps, we've handled as individual topics in this webinar series. And you can go back to some of those. If you go to our YouTube channel, our LetPub YouTube channel, you should be able to see some of these past topics. They're also going to be available on PeerRef if you go to that webinars page and scroll down. And then, of course, we'll finish up with a Q&A. And again, I like to answer general questions. I also like to handle specific questions. If you have something that you've run into as a problem, tackling a specific scenario can be, I think, entertaining for the entire audience. Okay. So again, brief review to begin with. Why does peer review take so long? This is an expansive question, but we're going to try to address the problems that are going on right now and the inherent difficulties with peer review and what makes it such a slow process at times, because you can see that it's widely varying from journal to journal. The major thing is securing reviewers. So the number of reviews an editor needs to reach a decision is variable. A lot of times it's journal policy, but the standard is two. Most journals that adhere to COPE guidelines and are a COPE member, which should be a standard for you to be publishing in that journal, they don't allow a single reviewer. So you're looking at least two. Reviewers are often unavailable, right? This is quite common. An associate editor may go through a huge number of reviewers that they solicit before they even land on two. This is obviously going to cause delays. It's also going to be specific to time of year, right? For holidays, summer vacation, these types of things. And so overall, what you have is a very overwhelmed reviewer community. It's something that's oft discussed at these some of the industry meetings that we attend. This is always a topic. It's always a symposium topic where we're trying to address how do we handle this overwhelmed reviewer community. The other thing is late reviews. So busy reviewers can lead to late returns. It's pretty standard, and that's the problem. It's become the rule rather than the exception to the rule. And so associate editors are kind of trying to plan in for late returns, right, before they can get anything back. The problem is because the reviewers are doing this for free, because it's simply a service activity for the scientific community, it's very, very difficult to ensure that a reviewer is going to meet their deadlines. You can only bug them, essentially. So the key is here, and you're going to see this when we go through some of the points in detail, is that a well-written and logically presented and complete manuscript is probably going to get a faster review than a poorly written paper. A lot of times these late reviews are because the reviewers simply get tired of the manuscript they're looking at, and they just slow down on it. The last thing you have is conflicting reviews and extra opinions. So sometimes you run into a problem where there's a really strong conflict in the reviews, either between reviewers, between the reviewers and the associate editor, and they may decide to solicit additional opinion, which essentially adds a new round to it. Trying to go out to that third reviewer is probably going to take the same amount of time. This is then going to add time to the peer review process overall. So that's what we're dealing with. This is why peer review is taking so long, anywhere from a month to a year or more, depending on the journal that you're talking about. So this is the big question. Where can I streamline the peer review process? And you can see the process here, initiating with author submitting the manuscript, the assessment of the manuscript, or typically what we call a desk rejection. Manuscript then being sent out to reviewers for the full peer review process. It can, of course, occur in a variety of formats, open and then blinded, single or double. And then editors assessing the reviews and the answers, and the author giving the revisions. Again, this is a big step. It's been devoted entire webinars that we've done on how to deal with reviewer concerns and write your response letter. And then a manuscript acceptance or rejection. And of course, that lag time for actual publications where you get the galleys or the proofs, and then they have to get you into the next issue, which can at times be quite backed up. So the key here is the items that we covered in one of the early slides. Your influence here is in one, sort of the pre-submission process, which would be journal selection. The actual manuscript preparation itself, which would be a pre-submission step. The during submission step, which typically sounds simple, but there's little mistakes you can make that can cause delays. And then all the way after this initial process is the after peer review, or again, this writing of the response letter, which is sometimes the biggest challenge for authors. And so this is the big question. Why is selecting the right journal so important? And also, why is selecting the right criteria for the journal so important? Selecting the best target journal is going to save you time overall. The biggest waste that we often see is poor journal selection, because any one step in the process, if you're on the right track, it may cause delays, but inevitably it will go through. If you start with the wrong journal, you risk having to repeat the process numerous times. And going through the overall process is extremely time consuming, and it can also be taxing on your motivation. Another big aspect is improving the likelihood of accomplishing goals like fast publication and time-sensitive results. Again, fitting with the journal, which you'll see some of the strategies we cover is going to aid with this goal. And of course, another big one that we're focused on outside of just getting published is publishing in the right journal that's going to actually help researchers in your field. So focusing on readership, and it's going to improve your visibility and reputation as a lab and a principal investigator. Excuse me. So consider what's important to you. And I'm going to highlight some of the things that I think you should be looking at closely and that maybe you don't consider as strongly in terms of your priority list if you're looking to publish fast, publish efficiently, and accomplish your goals. Because one of the things we mentioned at the beginning is I want to focus on big decisions here. So we're rapidly approaching the end of 2021, which has been a tough year. So we're going into 2022, and it's a good opportunity to focus on what do I want to accomplish in 2022 in terms of publishing. You can start to outline what 12 months is going to look like for your publishing goals. Of course, this is dependent upon the data you collect and when you're getting your studies done, but you can start to re-strategize perhaps and focus on these key decisions, one of which is obviously selecting journals. So this is really where you're selecting a pool of journals that should cover most of your research, unless you have wildly divergent topics. And then you can use this pool continuously to go back to when you select a specific journal. Obviously, a big one is journal impact factor. People are focusing on that quite strongly. What I suggest is that you look at journal impact factor to create that initial pool, but I would never prioritize it once you're in the pool. Simply going down the list and ranking the journals you want to target by journal impact factor, I think it's a huge mistake. I think it leads to numerous submissions to finally get accepted, and it's just not worthwhile. So use it as a threshold. What do you want your minimum journal impact factor to be? I know that's important to many of you and may be required by certain programs. But after that, I would resist the urge to make this your primary criteria for journal selection for any given paper. Another big one is indexing, right? So indexing SCI is often a requirement, or SCIE now. So of course you have to pay attention to that. Journal prestige, which is related to impact factor, but I think independent. And the way I would look at journal prestige again is the size and impact you think that it has in general, if it's going to look good as a name on your CV. But again, journal prestige, if you're not publishing in the right journal, just because you get accepted doesn't mean you're going to get citations. Relevance of the research published obviously is crucial. This is going to be key to acceptance. If it's not relevant, not only is it not going to be worth publishing, but you're going to see problems in getting your paper accepted. Acceptance and rejection rates, of course, are valuable empirical data that you can use to decide how risky a submission is going to be. The size of the print circulation, so again, the journal reach in terms of how many people are going to be reading it. Manuscript turnaround time is obviously going to be a priority if you're looking for speed and efficiency in publishing. And a lot of journals are publishing this data now. I don't think it's super important, the turnaround times versus each other, but simply the fact that the journal is releasing that data is always a good sign. If they're putting those numbers up, it suggests that they're going to adhere, and you're not going to get these lengthy delays because they know they've stated this up front. Editor characteristics can be crucial. So finding your people in your field where you feel like you're going to get a fair review can be a crucial step. Oops, sorry about that. And then quality of reviewer comments. Again, this is something subjective, word of mouth. The best way to find this information is something like on peer ref. So you can go to the journals tab above. So if you look up above your screen right now on the menu bar on peer ref, there's going to be a journals tab. If you go there, you can check out journals and use that as a tool to look at some of these metrics that we're discussing. But perhaps more importantly, you're going to see colleague reviews of these journals, and they will probably give the best subjective information on quality of peer review, whether they think, again, the review was fair. And then previous experience publishing in the journal is obviously valuable. Colleagues' recommendations, again, that goes along with the quality of peer review. International status, open access, if that's a priority for you. Publication charge and costs, which shouldn't change the timeline, but may, again, be applicable to your situation. Promotion via social media platforms, and press attention to the journal. Again, those are not going to necessarily affect efficiency, but things that you should be aware of. Okay, so to get into the nitty-gritty of it, identifying potential journal targets. The key is to narrow the search. So again, you may have a large pool for your work in general, but looking for 3 to 5 journals that are a good fit for your manuscript. That way, if the first one doesn't go through, if the second one doesn't go through, you immediately know the next that you have on the list to go through, which I think is a key step. Visiting the journal website can be beneficial in this. Make sure that your research fits the scope, and don't try to pigeonhole it or just work it into the scope. It should fit the scope in general, and then you should be looking at your abstract, introduction, this type of thing, and making sure that in your writing, it's apparent that it fits the scope. Make it easy for the editor to pass it through to the peer review process and not give you that desk rejection. The other thing is to look that they've published manuscripts similar to yours. Again, if you're citing work in your manuscript that is also found in this journal, very good sign. Journals may have very specific areas of focus as well as restrictions. Make sure that you're matching up. Make sure that your document type is matching up. And just because a journal says they accept something doesn't mean it's commonly accepted. They may technically accept it, but when you go and look, they may not have much of it, right? So be aware of what they're actually publishing and make sure that it fits both the articles that you see, as well as that scope and those restrictions on document type. Once you have them selected, you want to consider options. Pre-submission inquiries can be helpful. Usually you have an abstract and a cover letter early on, so you could still be working on the manuscript and you could still be looking at a pool of journals. But as soon as you come up with one that you're considering, why not reach out? It's a simple step. You might not get an answer, but if you do reach out, you can get sort of an expected response early on, and it may help you in terms of speeding this process. Average time to complete the peer review. Again, a lot of these are published, so these turnaround times can be valuable. Again, I wouldn't worry so much about, oh, this is 10 days different than this one. That's not terribly relevant. I think what we're all trying to avoid is those big delays. When we talk about what are your publishing goals for 2022, it's those big delays that crush you. So when a journal puts those numbers up, you should be able to reasonably expect you're not going to have these issues, which I'm sure many of you have run into, where you get ghosted and you get no responses for months at a time. So you should be able to avoid that by looking at journals that are at least willing to list these sort of data for you. Another great option, cascading peer review or article transfer. So a lot of journals, particularly if they're society journals, may send rejected ones, even ones that have desk rejections, to partner journals for consideration. Obviously going to save you a huge amount of time, typically doesn't involve reformatting or anything like that. And so rolling it into it can be valuable. Again, you may want to check if they do have this sort of policy, verify that the journal they're going to roll it into meets your requirements. But this can be a valuable way to increase the speed of the process. And now we move into the next step, manuscript preparation and submission. So this first one here, follow the journal's author guidelines, crucial. I think we mentioned this in every webinar that we do on the peer review process on manuscript submission, but adhering to the journal author guidelines is crucial. So ensure you have all necessary elements there. You can see some of the examples listed. Make sure you are properly formatted, or that you consider journals where formatting is not extremely strict. Journals more and more so are discussing the idea of easing formatting requirements during the submission phase. It's a big trend in the industry that we've been seeing. And so it's fine to target those journals. There's a lot of journals and publishers doing it. And if it saves you time and effort, do so. But whatever formatting requirements they do have, do not mess them up. Don't make mistakes there. It is so easy for them to reject you based on this. And it could take weeks before you get this response. And it's a total waste. Really, you never had a chance from the beginning, but it might delay your submissions by weeks. So pay careful attention. Also, all necessary statements. Again, this goes with formatting, but ethics, data, conflict of interest, that type of thing. And certainly don't exceed word or figure or table limits. Again, these are hard restrictions that'll get you rejected. Moving on in manuscript preparation and submission, align with the aims and scopes. Again, the worst thing you can try to do is align research that isn't within the aims and scope simply by trying to write it in. However, if you've established that you fit the journal's aims and scopes, your overall research does, the way you write this into the paper can be crucial. So you want to browse this information first to determine if you're a good match. Once you've established that you're a good match, pay attention to that information and try to adopt perhaps some of the language or language analogous to that within the manuscript. In particular, if you can get it anywhere into the abstract or the introduction, this is going to be quite helpful. You should also look at your title and see if it's aligning with similar titles from this journal. A big one that I want to highlight here, just last month we had a webinar about this. We put on a webinar with Hindawi, a large open access publisher, about special issues because authors seem to under-leverage this opportunity. Special issues are a great thing to target, again, when you're mapping out your 2022 goals for publishing. If you want to be fast, if you want to be efficient, if you're looking to increase your H index for 2020, 2022, pay attention to special issue opportunities. These typically have deadlines, which keeps things on track. The journal is very, very focused on their special issues, and they have hard deadlines, which ensures not only that the peer review process is going to be efficient, but also that the actual publication, meaning from acceptance to when it's in print, should be at least on time. I don't know if it'll be fast, but it will align with what they say it's going to be. You shouldn't see delays there in terms of trying to get things rolled over. Special issues also increase visibility, have an excellent readership, larger audience, and they can tend to increase the chances of collaboration because usually there's associate editors there that are very collaboratively working on these special issues. Next step, passing the journal's initial screening. The outright rejection, again, is a huge time sink for your overall publishing goal. These are things for the initial screening. Plagiarism and duplicate submission check. Avoid this. You should know it anyway before you're going in, but if required, get a plagiarism check. LetPub does plagiarism checks very, very affordably. You can try to get into some software yourself that will allow you to do a plagiarism check or just give it the eye test, but don't let this be a step that gets you rejected because it's just going to be a complete waste of your time. Look for completeness in the manuscript, again, going along with the formatting, no missing elements, adherence to the journal's author and ethical guidelines. Review your figures carefully. Make sure they're in shape. Don't put in halfway done figures or weak figures that you intend to revise later because it makes the paper almost unreviewable. And finally, get a language assessment. So determine if you need language help. If you do, go to a service like LetPub. Go to colleagues who can assist you and get the language up to par because, again, this is a big thing for desk rejections because it makes it not worth going out to peer reviewers if this isn't passing the initial screening. So get that language assessment completed. And then in terms of after peer review, which we think of as the response letter step. So these are ways to streamline your response letter. There's a lot of ways, but these are the key things that we notice are making it a little bit easier on yourself. Start the response letter immediately. As soon as you get the reviews, you want to both be looking at the response letter, at least get the document put together, open a new Word file, and get the document started. You also want to be looking at easy fixes that you can see in the manuscript, even if that's all you do the first day that you receive it is correct the typos and things that were pointed out. Go ahead and do it. Send the document to your co-authors immediately. As soon as you have the reviews, send them to your co-authors. You can come, if you want to have a discussion about it and you want to write them a long email, that's fine. You can send it the next day, the day after. You have time to put that together, but get it in their hands immediately. This process of interacting with your co-authors can be extremely, extremely slow. So get the paper out to them so they can see it immediately as soon as you've seen it. Assigning then tasks to your co-authors can be crucial. So if they are going to play a significant role in this, make sure you're assigning tasks and provide deadlines to these colleagues. Again, this is where things seem to slow down. Another thing, I forgot, as soon as you receive reviews, if there's concerns about language, you immediately need to figure out what your solution is. Are you just going to be going to your colleagues? Is it something you can improve yourself? Quite often it's not. If you're going to use a vendor, if you're going to use someone like LetPub, plan right then and there to go to them as soon as possible. Don't wait till you've finished everything up to send it to them. So get that process started right away. Once revision related tasks are determined, identify if you need a revision extension. Some journals have very, very tight turnarounds. If it's substantial revisions that are requested, that type of thing, it's okay to ask for an extension, but do it before the resubmission due date. In particular, it's best to just do it early on. You should be able to map it out and decide if you're going to have it done in time, and you should be able to ask immediately. The sooner you ask, probably the easier it is to get that extension. And then one final point I want to make about this step. Again, for your overall publishing goals, for your 2020 goals, for your goal of this paper, you really need to sit down and evaluate, is it worth doing this response? It's very difficult. Sometimes reviewers We'll give you the option to resubmit with major revisions, but it's going to be very, very difficult. And they don't really expect that you'll be able to get it through. You need to speak with your co-authors and try to think critically about the realistic chances of this. And this can sometimes be difficult. You may want to solicit opinion from someone else that you trust. You may want to come to someone like us where you can get a scientific editing sort of opinion on the viability of getting this published, or getting these revisions accepted. So that's a big, big step, because that can be a huge waste of time. If they give you tons of experiments to do, all this type of stuff, you're going to have to write a 15-page response letter with all these changes. You need to determine whether that's worth your while, even if it were to get accepted. And certainly if you think that it's a possibility that's still going to get rejected, you really need to weigh, do we just back out and do we go to our next option? And a lot of this will have to do with what are your backup options. If you have solid backup options, you might be more willing to walk away from this type of peer review and simply go on to your next submission. If you're later on in the process, or if you don't have a lot of venues for this type of work, then you may have to be a bit more committed to it. But make a conscious evaluation of this. Don't say, oh, we got the opportunity to resubmit, we should automatically do that. I think this is one of the biggest mistakes that labs can make. It doesn't have to be automatic, and oftentimes it shouldn't be, because these are what get your papers stuck for a long, long time. And then follow the golden rules of response letter writing. Again, I encourage you to go to other webinars where we cover this in depth, but answer completely. You have a responsibility to answer all these questions. If you don't, it's not going to be taken seriously. Of course, answer politely. So don't criticize reviewer comments. There are opportunities to disagree or to refute something if it's clearly wrong. Sometimes you may want to go to the associate editor directly for these types of concerns so as not to upset the reviewer. But again, be cordial, be professional. And then answer with evidence. So support your explanations. And when you do disagree, like you see here, provide a coherent argument supported by the evidence. Clearly state the reasons for your rebuttal. Don't just disagree subjectively or based on opinion. Contradict it with evidence. All right. And then lastly, for after peer review, ensure the response letter and revised manuscript address all reviewer comments. If it's incomplete, again, the reviewers will have no intention of giving you another chance to resubmit, and resubmit all the required materials to the journal. So this acts like a second process for your initial submission and that initial screening. Whatever you needed to do in terms of the resubmission process, they have guidelines for that. Follow it strictly so that you don't cause yourself delays. Again, we're focused on efficiency of the peer review and the publishing process here. And with that, I think we can get into questions. So I'm a little bit over, so we're at 35 minutes approximately, but I think we should be able to address all the questions we need. Anything we don't get to, again, I can answer in the hub. So if you haven't any questions, if you haven't had a chance to put your questions in, please add them now. I'll give people a chance to put them in here. All right, so if you have questions, please, again, use the Q&A function. You can add your questions there. I do have a question in the chat, so I'm going to address this while I give people a chance to add their questions to the Q&A. So the question we have here, is it necessary for the second round of peer review, once returned to the reviewer, is it necessary to have another round sort of where they have their responses, or can a decision be made by the editor? Typically, the reviewer is going to clear it with the editor every time. Again, if you address things completely and the reviewer is satisfied, there may not be a response. You may have a situation where the editor simply gives the okay, but any response that you've written to the reviewers, or any answers to their concerns, those will be seen by the reviewer. So it's always going to have to go through them. You might only get a response from the associate editor, particularly in later rounds. And I think there are some questions, and this has come up before, so I'll address it now. With the cascading process for journals, typically what happens is the journal at the time of submission, during that submission process through whatever portal you use, quite often Editorial Manager, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with now, they will ask you if you want to put it up for that consideration. You can just submit to a journal that allows it, but it's always going to be an option. And so if you check the option, it will automatically always go through. And you should be aware that it's going to go through because you checked that. However, usually you will get notified that it's being passed along. And if for some reason you change your mind or something, you have a really bad experience with that submission, you decide, I don't want it to go to any other partner journals here, you can remove it from that process by communicating with them. Okay, getting some more questions in. So question here about, so you have a manuscript, it's given a chance for revise and resubmit, either major or minor. Is it okay to submit to another journal while you're revising? The answer here is definitely going to be no. Typically, the statement that you include or the agreement that you make when you submit includes specific language that the work has not been submitted elsewhere and will not be submitted elsewhere as long as it's in the peer review process at this journal. So if you decide, again, like I said, a big important question is, do we want to do these revisions? Is it worth it to respond to the reviewer comments? Are they giving us a legitimate chance to get this published? If you decide not, don't double dip. Don't try to respond to it while resubmitting elsewhere. You need to remove yourself from the peer review process at that journal. This is crucial. Let the editor know that you're officially withdrawing from the process. Then you can go ahead and submit wherever else you'd like. But no, do not go through the process with them and then submit to another journal. That would be a big, big mistake. Question here, can we tell whether it is a major or minor revision based on the given revision time? This is tricky. So sometimes for major revision, because people tend to think that it's going to take longer and there's going to be more comments if it's a major revision, and vice versa for minor revision. This isn't always the case because sometimes a major revision will be related to something like required experiments, for example, and they think things are well done. And it's quality overall, but they really need this verification experiment done. That's always going to be a major revision, right? Because it's work that you have to go back and do. So you can't base it purely on that. So I guess this isn't something functional, but it's something for your mental health. Don't get a lot of angst and don't get worked up if it's taking a long time, that it's going to be a bad review or a very difficult review. That's not always the case. Because again, as you remember from the early slides, a lot of the problems that we're facing and what makes peer review take such a long time is because simply getting the reviewers and getting them to do the things. It's the logistics. It's not that your paper is particularly difficult. That can influence it, but that doesn't always mean you're going to have a bad review. And then another question on journal selection. Again, we've done a couple webinars where we exclusively cover journal selection. We intend to do many more in the future, so be on the lookout for those. But always, again, you can go to our YouTube page. You can look at Peer Ref if you want to go back to some of our webinars where we answer a lot of these questions on journal selection. But this one that we have is, how are we going to decide whether the article we have is suitable for open access or not open access? Any article is suitable for open access. Bottom line, open access is a choice on how you want your work to be published, and any article can be suitable for this. So you don't have to make a choice there. The concern is, if you want open access, you need to verify the availability of that when you're selecting the sort of pool of journals that you're interested in. The nice thing now is if you're looking at societies or larger publishers, typically they're going to have at least some selection of open access within their overall journal pool. So you shouldn't have trouble finding these. The next question that we have, this is about the pre-submission cover letters, or this sort of pre-submission inquiry. Are all journal editors open to this inquiry? How can you tell? Not all of them are. And the only way to tell is to reach out and see if you get an answer. In my opinion, again, as long as your correspondence with them is professional, brief, which shows an appreciation for their time, and you're just soliciting some reasonable information from them, they should be open to it. If they're not, I would strongly advise against going to that journal. All right. So if the journal doesn't have time to communicate with you on an issue that is going to help speed the review process, both for you and for them, it suggests maybe that they're going to be a bit of a slow journal anyway. And maybe, again, you want to avoid them if we're looking for publishing efficiency in 2022. So I would say don't worry too much about that. I don't think any journal editor is going to have a problem with you submitting. So let's say it's Nature or something, and you really want to publish here. This is like your number one goal. You don't want to compromise anything by making a mistake. This is, I wouldn't worry about this. This is not an issue. Maybe you don't get a response and you still want to go to that journal, but I don't think you're going to cause problems for yourself by doing these type of inquiries. So it's fine to reach out, and there should be a willingness on the part of journals and all academics to communicate with each other and provide the necessary information. Okay, this question here, let me see if I understand it correctly. I think this is, I received the attached file for the initial review of my paper. So the next step is to wait for reviewer comments. Yes, I'm not quite sure the situation that you're outlining, but I suspect it's one of two things. Either you've gotten the paper back with comments on it, but not the reviewer's comments. In this instance, I would reach out to the associate editor and make sure that this is the entirety of the reviews, and you can start on the process of responding to these. Or you may have simply gotten the notice in whatever the system is, such as an editorial manager, that it's out for review, or that the review has been completed. In this case, yes, you're just going to go ahead and wait for those comments. It might be a situation where the editor is working on synthesizing them and writing their response, because quite often that's what the editor is going to be doing as part of the process. That can take a little while. I wouldn't bug the editor right away. But if that starts to drag on, you can politely inquire if there's an expected date so that you can plan it into your schedule, this type of thing. And that, again, should be a relatively reasonable correspondence to have that isn't going to cause you problems. Okay, other questions? Oh, this is an interesting one. This is something we should cover. Can the manuscript be resubmitted to the same journal after being revised after a rejection? This is a unique situation that, well, it's unique, but not totally uncommon. So quite often you'll get an opportunity where it's rejected and the state it's in, there's some sort of significant problem. Again, sometimes it's related to the experiments, right? In terms of the data that's required by the peer reviewers. And what they do is they want to reject you because they don't want to continue along the line with these current reviewers. There's too much work to do. It wouldn't be efficient for their processes to continue along in this given loop of the process. And what they want you to do is, if you're willing to, you can go make the substantial changes, you'll get the feedback, and then you can resubmit as a new submission in the process. This quite often happens, and you do need to do what you say here. Mention the previous submission. Usually they'll give you very specific instructions, so pay attention to these and be as transparent as possible. But yeah, usually you can mention like the ID number of your previous submission and indicate in your cover letter cover letter that this is a resubmission of a previously rejected manuscript that's been resubmitted at the request of the editor, right? So that you're not trying to do anything dubious. You're not trying to resubmit something that was rejected, a double typist submission. This was requested by the journal and given to you as an option. So yes, always mention that in your cover letter. Again, how many reviewers usually? Two, at least two. When they go to more, again, it's a burden on them. It slows the process. So they always do more than one. And then two is generally the most common. And really it's three because the associate editor is providing, the associate editor is ultimately making the decision. So they sort of function as a third reviewer. So yeah, but usually two separate peer reviewers that they're going out to. It can be more. If a reviewer backs out, then it's a replacement. And technically that's then going through three people, which is going to slow it down, even though you only get two back. Or sometimes when there's disputes, they go out to a third. This drags on, but sometimes it's required. And there's no way to get around that. And usually that doesn't have anything to do with something you've done. So all these things we talked about to give yourself the best possible chance at a speedy review, like making sure things are completed accurately, that all the requirements are met. Usually that's not an issue. Usually it's just a tough paper, a difficult topic, and they needed to go to an extra reviewer. There's usually not much you can do about that. Yeah, so I'm going to cover this one because this is an individual situation that I think people run into that's a little bit tricky. If the manuscript is on the editor's side, so I'm presuming what you're saying is you're following this through the editorial management system, which shows you the stage you're in. And it's just sitting there for 4 months is the example given here after submission, and you're not getting a reply with your correspondence. Can I withdraw the manuscript or not? Certainly you can withdraw. You can withdraw the manuscript at any time you want. You have total control of your paper. So always keep that in mind. The more important question is, should you withdraw? And this is a personal decision that everybody makes. But for me, again, if you're waiting 4 months and it's unacceptable for you, just withdraw, go somewhere else. If you're waiting 4 months and you're not getting replies and you think the correspondence that you're trying to make is reasonable, withdraw. Don't hesitate. There's a lot of journals out there. Go up to the top of your screen right now, click the journals tab on PeerRef and start looking for journals. There are a ton of journals out there. There's no reason to get stuck into a process where you're waiting and nobody else is even, looking at or considering your manuscript. If you're not satisfied, move on. Again, particularly when it's a situation where you aren't dead set on that first journal. If you have other options, get out and go to them. And you should set these standards. These are the big decisions that I was talking about before that I want you guys to start thinking about going into 2022. What's your publishing plan going to be? How long are you willing to wait in these various steps before you decide to withdraw and move on to the next one? Make these decisions for yourself and for your lab and look at it for a year timeline. If I'm going to meet my publishing goals, what do I need to set for deadlines, for expectations? So make these decisions now. Don't make them once it's in, because if you start making these decisions post hoc, once you're in the process, it's very easy to get biased. And you're thinking like, oh, well, I've waited this amount of time, I might as well wait longer, right? The sunk cost fallacy, that type of thing. Make a publishing plan and make these decisions now. Make them your New Year's resolutions, right? Before January 1st, Western New Year's. I know we have a lot of Chinese attendees here, so their New Year's will be a little bit different, but make this resolution at the start of the calendar year for us about what you're going to do and what your own personal policies for publishing will be. Index, I do want to talk about impact factor briefly. We discussed it. It's something we discussed extensively again in our other journal selection webinars, but just to touch on it, because this question comes up a lot. Impact factor, how do you trust the journal index and the IF that they're showing? Always go to Clarivate Analytics Master Journal Tool List. They are the company that owns and controls the Journal Citation Report, the JCR, from which the impact factor is gathered. Only look at impact factor on their site, Clarivate Analytics, journal citation reports, master journalists, they're the only ones who can actually provide a real impact factor. Don't go to other various impact factor sites and these types of things. Not legitimate. There's one group that owns the impact factor and is the only one that can report on it. Others might report on it accurately, but you should always verify. For example, peer refs data is drawn directly from that, and it cites, if there's impact factors there, it's citing, but you should always be double checking, particularly when a journal's listing it or if you're hearing it from a third party. And one last question. Is the info covered here suitable to humanities journals too? Absolutely. What you might find in humanities, I do want to mention field specific differences. In humanities, you might see that your average duration is a little bit longer because these are so much smaller fields. And so again, this problem of finding peer reviewers can be even more difficult, right? So they might be a little bit slower. So the absolutes in terms of, to go back to what we were talking about, your expectations of what's a reasonable time, what are my policies going to be, and how long I'm willing to wait. You may need to vary those depending on your field for humanities and stuff, but all the ideas here of what you should be doing for fast and efficient publishing for 2022, for meeting your goals, all of that should apply regardless of field. And I think that's all we have. Anything else here I've already answered. So I think that is it. And we are quickly approaching, we're at 55 minutes now. So I do want to stop it. I am going to go back to the chat and see if there's anything I missed there. If you asked a question in the chat rather than the Q&A, what I'm going to do for you is I will go back through, I'm going to flip through it. I will copy and paste any questions that I see from there that we missed. And I'm going to go ahead and put them in that, in the LetPub, the peer ref hub for the LetPub webinar series. So you can go ahead and go over to that hub. I will paste the questions over there and I can start to give you some answers. And if there's things you want elaborated on, if you have more specific questions, please, please, please join me over there over the coming day, the coming week, really the coming month until we have our next webinar. And with that, please be aware of our next webinar. For this one, again, just a reminder, you're going to receive a follow-up email. It's going to have the on-demand recording for you. It is also going to have a link to the participation certificate. So be on the lookout for that. Should receive it in about 24 hours. And then also be on the lookout. If you're on our mailing list, you're going to get an email about our next webinar. We hope you guys enjoyed it. We love doing this series. So if you want to join us regularly, that's great. We're always looking to grow the base. We had great attendance today. We'll also be doing another one with Hindawi that we'll be posting. And so you'll be able to see the advertisement for that. I strongly recommend registering for those. Those tend to have really good Q&A sessions with actual editor-in-chief or journal staff or publisher staff, and they can answer a lot of these questions very insightfully. So again, if I have anything here that I didn't answer, something that you want addressed about how to achieve your efficiency goals and your speed goals for 2022, let's talk about it in the Peer Ref Hub. All right. With that, I'll let you guys go for today. I appreciate your attendance, and we will see you next time.